Hello, I'm Darren. I'm going to show you how to make vegan macaroni cheese. The first thing I've done is I put on a large pot of water to cook 500 grams of macaroni. Now I've done that because filtered water takes a little bit of time to boil, so that's my timing point. I can get the rest of this done in the 8 minutes or so that it takes for the pasta to cook. I can actually make the sauce for the cheese, so that's the reason why we're starting now. So into the boiling hot water goes 500 gram packet of macaroni. Make sure you stir it straight away so that it doesn't all clump together. In the water is just a pinch or two of salt, which was added earlier. That's the only thing you add to the water. The timing, 8 minutes of cooking, starts as soon as it comes back to the boil. Next thing I need to do is turn another burner on, and in a small saucepan I place 1/4 of a cup of plain flour. In this case I'm using pasta flour, which is semolina. I think it's got a high gluten content, which adds for a nice thickness. To that I add the same amount, 1/4 of a cup of olive oil. This is to make my roux. Goes onto the heat and you stir. This process should not be interrupted, so that's why, as I say, I like to do this as a bit of a timing thing that I like to work at. Now what I'm doing is I'm heating this up. It's cooking the flour. It was always very difficult when you did this with butter because the butter would burn, but the olive oil doesn't seem to be as fragile. I tend to lift the saucepan off rather than adjust the heat too much. Now as you can see, it's starting to thicken and turn into a paste. That means that the flour is starting to cook, and that's how you end up without a floury taste to your roux. Too much heat. Now the milk I use is oat milk. You add this a little at a time, and this will start to build up the volume of the sauce. You can see you start to end up with a real paste. Little at a time. And keep stirring. You don't want it to burn or stick to the pan. I've not had that issue yet. So you can see the water is now boiling on the pasta. So my 8-minute countdown has started. It's almost 7 o'clock on the dot. So that means we'll be eating this by 10 past. And you can see what's happening here is we're ending up with a nice paste, and that is just so simple. None of this fiddling, messing about. And this is the basis of any white sauce that you would make. You can just add flavour to it, in this case cheese. As it starts to get a bit more volume, I can add a little more of the oat milk. And you can see I'm still ending up with that very creamy consistency, no lumps, and it's so easy. Now the warmer you get it, the more the thicker it becomes. So depending on the consistency that you like your cheese sauce, of course, depends on how much you would how much you'd heat it and how much milk you would add.
Would another type of non-dairy milk work instead of oat?
I would certainly imagine a soy milk would work.
Rice milk?
I could only imagine so. Rice milk has a tendency to be a bit thinner, but you know, oat milk is primarily just water, so I imagine you'd do okay with that. I don't tend to measure the milk too much. I imagine there must be at least a cup of milk, if not a bit more, that goes into this. It's a bit hard to sort of pull the milk out afterwards, after you've done it right, and say, oh yeah, no, that's how much milk you need. I'll have to do a test at some point and get an accurate figure. You see little bubbles forming around the edges on the saucepan, so that's the bits that are starting to thicken up. So you just keep moving them away from the edges and into the centre, and as you can see, it continues to keep thickening up the more that you cook it, and you end up with a beautiful smooth white sauce. It's going to thicken with the cheese. Now we're using a
vintage white
cheddar type soy cheese. Should have saved the bag. Oh, it's only just over in there in the bin, we can check that. I can tell you what sort it was. Tried a couple of different types. The one that we're currently using seems to be the most macaroni-cheese-ish. Of course, there are other places in the world where you can get some really nice alternate cheese substitutes. We're limited by what's available here in Australia. You can see it's just starting to bubble. That means it needs a little bit more milk.
You do need to check that your soy cheese...
Yes, we found that one of the soy cheeses that we liked actually contained a milk product, only in some basic form, but that was obviously to get the flavour. I also like to check that my noodles aren't all stuck to the bottom of the saucepan occasionally. We're about 6 minutes into it now. So I'll just go for a little bit more of a chunk of milk to thin that down a bit. Now the next thing I'm going to add in is 1/4 cup of yeast flakes, about a tablespoon of fake chicken stock, now that's going to give me a little bit more of a yellowy colour, as well as add some flavour into the cheese. Now I've got 250 grams of this grated of this soy cheese, just a cheddar flavour. Now, as you can see, that's going to end up quite a nice thick texture on the macaroni. I have to be careful that I don't make this burn or stick at this point. You keep stirring while the cheese is melting and warming up. There's a fair bit of cheese in there. I put a little bit of little sprinkle of paprika, not much.
tiniest dollop of Dijon mustard. This ends up being part of the trick that gives the macaroni cheese its original sort of flavour. Now the more I mix this, the more that that cheese is going to melt. And we're very close to the 8-minute mark for the pasta. So I'll just take that off the flame. I'll pull a noodle out, and we'll see how it tastes. Yep, pretty well cooked. I've got the colander in this there in the sink. Very carefully tip the water off. Try and dry it out a bit. Okay, so back into the saucepan that we cooked the pasta, we put the noodles back in out of the colander. Remember that this is hot. How many will this serve?
Well, we've got this 4 of us, and there usually ends up being a little bit left over. But you know, I don't know that we're eating this as a side dish like you're supposed to. You're probably eating this more like a meal, so I'll get the rest of that in a moment. So as you can see in there, now I just stir this. Don't need that on. I just keep folding this in over and over, and macaroni cheesy goodness. Stir it through thoroughly. Now we grab bowls and we eat it. Ben and I like to sprinkle a little more nutritional yeast on as we eat it. The kids, not so much, they just seem to hoe into it. But there's no reason why you couldn't pop it into the oven and put some breadcrumbs on top. Just going to grab a spatula. Pop it into the oven with some breadcrumbs or something on top, and just bake it for a little while with a bit of nutritional yeast, and you would end up with you know, a baked dish that you could scoop out and serve, which would be really nice, especially in winter time. Summertime here in Australia, it's a little bit out of the question to be putting the oven on, especially on a day like today when you've got the air conditioner running to try and stay cool. Oh, listen to that. Okay, so the next trick is to serve it up.